I want to share with you a little passage from one of my favorite books about nonviolent revolts. It's called This is an Uprising. It's by Mark Engler and Paul Engler. Really, really good resource. If your local Indivisible group or grassroots group, community organizing group needs a first book for your new book club, I know that my Indivisible chapter has now started a book club. Highly, highly recommend this one. I actually think it pairs extremely well with this book, Blueprint for Revolution. If you need a 1-2 for your book club, these two back to back, great reads. Okay, I had to move my light a little bit so I could see in the dark cave that is my bedroom. So I'm going to read a little bit here. I'd love to know what your reaction, what your thoughts are to this passage, and then I have some thoughts of my own. When it comes to mass upheaval, momentum-based campaigns do not wait for moments of unrest to spontaneously occur. Rather, they seek to consciously generate whirlwinds to take advantage of outside trigger events when they occur and to sustain periods of peak activity. Hybrid organizations such as Otpor in Serbia and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the United States were successful at doing this, enabling them to endure multiple waves of revolt. By the time they finished their campaigns, they had gained enough active support that their allies were many and their enemies were fractured. As a result, they scored critical wins. But even groups that carry out disruptive action for long periods of time must understand their efforts in a larger context. How can movement activists absorb the energy of revolt into lasting structures? How can they protect the gains they have secured? And how can they spark new cycles of disruption that propel further change? The greatest practitioners of civil resistance have answered these questions by drawing on the strengths of different social change traditions. Although mobilizing unusual moments of peak unrest demands a unique methodology, this does not negate the value of skills from other approaches. Indeed, these skills become critical in various stages of social movements. When mass mobilizations, established organizations, and alternative communities see themselves as complementary, they can create a movement ecosystem that allows diverse approaches to promoting change to flourish. I am just itching to tie this into permaculture, but we'll get there. Hang on. Focusing on movements outside of the U.S., the tradition of civil resistance acknowledges that strategic nonviolent action against authoritarian regimes must function as part of a wider drive to build up the kind of healthy civil society institutions that can keep a democracy intact. Right? In permaculture, we talk about the whole systems approach, right? Okay. No one should believe that with the downfall of the dictatorship, an ideal society will appear immediately, Gene Sharp wrote, a decade before mass protests in Tahrir Square. The disintegration of the dictatorship simply provides the beginning point for long-term efforts to improve the society and meet human needs more adequately. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Here in the United States right now, the work that we're doing, that's just getting us to the beginning point. That's not the end. The end is not toppling the dictator. That's just the beginning of all the good things that we get to do and build, the kind of justice that we get to seek, the kind of regenerative society that we get to help craft. If we do the work right now of helping build up that healthy civil society so that we can take us over that threshold, right? And do the necessary work that lies beyond toppling the fascists. Okay. For this reason, Sharp contended, careful precautions must be taken to prevent the rise of a new oppressive regime out of the confusion following the collapse of the old one. And this is something I've spoken on extensively. We need to begin as we mean to go along. We have to make sure that we are laying the foundation for the respect of the rule of law, for justice, equity, all of the good things that we want in the future. Otherwise, what we're going to end up with is cycles of strongmen. When we have violent resistance that topples an authoritarian, we often end up with coup after coup and authoritarian after authoritarian, and it becomes a really, really unstable society. If we want democracy, if we want justice, if we want the people to run the United States instead of a tyrant, instead of the Epstein class, instead of billionaires, then we need to start setting those expectations right now. Not only in ourselves, right? Not only as we are talking to each other about what kind of future we want, what kind of reforms we need, SCOTUS reforms, ending Citizens United, taxing billionaires out of existence, like brand new sweeping privacy laws and protections for the American people, getting dark money out of our politics. getting foreign money, Israel money out of our politics. We got to do all of that expectation setting right now for ourselves. What we are going to demand in the future, we also need to be expecting it of our elected officials. They need to be working for us and not the Epstein class, not the corporations that have led us into this nightmare. We also need to have a focus on justice in the time to come and not simply retribution and punishment. We need to have the expectation of a democratic society and a system of justice. No doubt, that is easier said than done, but the challenges of establishing a more just social order after a revolution do not apply only to nonviolent movements. Instead, they afflict all turbulent changes of state power, whether armed or unarmed. Studies have found that since at least the 1970s, when regimes are toppled, the post-transition states have been far more likely to become democratic if the movements that brought about the change employed tactics of strategic nonviolence, such as strikes, mass boycotts, and large-scale demonstrations. Remember, more than 40,000 protests in the United States last year, the three single days of protest in the history of the United States happened in 2025 in direct response to the tyranny of Donald Trump. When you have a massive uprising of regular, ordinary people who demand a civil society and the rule of law, the respect of human dignity, you're much more likely to form a democratic society going forward. In the case of guerrilla uprisings against an undemocratic state, revolutionaries still have to fill the power vacuum left by the old regime after they stop them. And because the armed force that carried out the overthrow is often the best organized institution of the resistance, its hierarchical structures are primed to take over. You have to begin as you mean to go along. The result, as in many post-colonial African states, is often a new dictatorship led by guerrilla commanders. That's not what we want for the future of this country. That's not what the American people want at all. It is so important to understand the power vacuum that comes after you topple a dictator has to be filled by someone. And the people who right now are engaged in resistance work, we are the ones who get to shape the future. We are the power holders. We're the ones who are moving. We are the ones who are setting the expectation. We know that it is the leaders of the resistance movement who get to help decide what kind of government we have going forward. And speaking of civil resistance leadership and movements, upheavals prompted by civil resistance do not face this difficulty, and therefore they have a better likelihood of producing positive long-term results. But it doesn't mean that because we are a civil resistance movement, because we are committed to our nonviolent discipline, that we're automatically going to get a democracy after this. We need huge, sweeping changes in the United States. The Constitution has failed to protect us. Our elected officials, especially Republicans in Congress, but also establishment Democrats, have failed to protect democracy and have in many, many instances facilitated its destruction here. We're not guaranteed to get democracy after this. We're not guaranteed to get reforms. I think we're also in a position where unless we have some real significant changes, a check on the power of the Epstein class of billionaires, we are very likely to end up in a system of oligarchy. It's just my personal opinion. If we don't constrain the rabid, unchecked power of the super rich, the greed, the insatiable greed of the super rich, then we are unlikely to have a functional democracy after this. Okay, let me keep reading here for a second. Still, the problems after the fall of an undemocratic regime are common. Although countries might not experience a reversion to autocratic rule as they did in Egypt, they must nonetheless confront a host of challenges in making new political leaders live up to progressive ideals, right? We're looking at the Democratic Party here. In Serbia and in several other color revolutions in the former Soviet bloc, such as the 2003 Rose Revolution in Georgia, 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine, young people played a critical role in leading quickly swelling mobilizations. But in all of these cases, they were unprepared for later events. Matthew Cullen, the author of The Time of the Rebels, a study of these uprisings, writes that there seemed to be no blueprint for what, if anything, these youth movements could achieve after their revolutions. In most cases, rank-and-file activists simply drifted away. They could help change their countries, but they found it harder to ensure that the politicians who came after remained true to the principles that were espoused during the revolution. Engler and Engler go on to say that we have to work to make sure that the changes we have fought for and won are safeguarded after the momentous upheaval has ended. And that's my question for you. What does it look like for us in the resistance movement to be deeply engaged in this work now, but also to think about the work ahead, to think about how we don't really start until we topple Donald Trump? How do we hold our politicians accountable in the future? How do we get the reforms that we need for democracy to thrive?